Hello everyone and welcome back to Thinkology. My name is Vamp and today we're talking about the Madsen Submarine murder, the submarine case, or the murder of Kim Wall. Whatever you know it as, I'm going to be upfront and say that there are some really disturbing details to the submarine case. So, rather than put a trigger warning on the vast majority of the video, I'll just say right now, if you're sensitive to topics of murder, indecent handling of a corpse, and sexual assault, this may not be for you. But for those of you still here, let's get right into who Kim Wall was, as well as the man that took her life. First of all, a lot of my sources are Swedish or Danish, so I apologize if anything is lost or sounds a bit odd in translation or is mispronounced. Sadly, I think it's important to talk about who Kim Wall was apart from her death. Victims of these tragedies are more than headlines after all. According to one Swedish news source, Nyheter24, Kim was born on March 23, 1987 in the Scandinavian municipality of Trelleborg. According to her LinkedIn page, she studied at Malmö Borskola, where she picked out an international baccalaureate which gave her access to studies all over the world. Over the years, Wall had accumulated an extremely large amount of knowledge all over the world, but it started in Lund, where she studied peace and conflict studies. Bachelor's degree was obtained in 2011 at the London School of Economics and Political Science (LSE) in International Relations, with a few months included via the University of Beijing. The years at university did not end there, but the adventure was off to Columbia University in New York. It dealt with a master's degree in international business and an extension with a focus on journalism. Meanwhile, Wall also studied Mandarin. To be able to study at Columbia, she received a scholarship from the Sweden America Foundation. Everyone who receives a scholarship is super competent. These are top abilities. You get it because you are so good, says Foundation President Anna Rosville Stewart for Expressen. There is a stately list of articles for a long list of different publications on Kim Wall's resume. Over the years, her important reports have been published in, among others, The Guardian, New York Times, Vice, Slate, and Time. Her work has been translated into several languages. Some selections are from post-war period in Sri Lanka following the earthquake in Haiti in 2015 and as an official journalist for the United Nations. A particularly strong report is about Idi Amin's horror chamber from Uganda, also published in Harper's Magazine. You guys know I'm not a journalist. I'm a Twitch streamer. I can do my absolute best for these videos, and I try not to be selective or let my own biases affect these videos, but like I said, I'm not actually a journalist. Kim, on the other hand, I have so much respect for as a researcher, as an accomplished reporter. She was only 30 years old, but her work left behind such an incredible, important legacy. In 2016, the year before she was killed, the Harper's Magazine article mentioned came out. If you want to read the article, it'll be linked in the sources below. And I want to give Kim some amazing credit for not shying away from rough topics. She's talking about horror chambers in Uganda, and rather than making it more palatable or perhaps easier to read for the audience she's reaching out to, Kim started off by describing the stench of decay that plagues the area and how it took a decade for the smell to go away. Just have to get some serious credit here. Kim deservedly received the Hansel Mead Award for Best Digital Report for her story Exodus, a story that was released in 2016 as well. However, it was the interview she agreed to with Peter Madsen that ultimately cut her life short in 2017. According to Narrator TV, Kim Wall's Danish boyfriend said that he and Kim Wall on Thursday, August 10th, 2017, had invited a small group of friends to a farewell party on Refshalund. Here, the couple would say goodbye before moving to China together a few days later. The first guest had just arrived when Kim Wall suddenly received a message from Peter Madsen. She had at some point in the spring had a short email correspondence with him to make a report about his work with rockets. As far as is known, Kim Wall had not heard from Peter Madsen in the following months, before he, this August evening, asked her to come over and drink a cup of tea in his workshop. Here he offered to line up for an interview that was to take place the same evening, and it was to take place on board the submarine. Yes, Peter Madsen had a UC-3 Nautilus submarine as well as a couple others. It's called a midget submarine or a mini submarine, and it's typically used for underwater maintenance exploration, archaeology, or scientific research when used by civilians. Since Madsen was an engineer, it's not too much of a stretch to see why he would have one, though some sources will speculate that he never intended on granting her an interview at all and had ulterior motives for inviting her on board. We'll see a bit more of that later. Continuing with our timeline though, shortly after, Kim Wall returned to the farewell party. She asked her boyfriend for advice on whether she should choose to interview over the company. Together they agreed that the trip with Peter Madsen was a good chance to do a report for an American magazine. Also, because the couple was going to a family party the next day before the trip to China, Kim Wall asked his girlfriend if he wanted to go sailing on the submarine. He considered it, but chose to stay with the guests. He felt it was necessary for them to not sit alone at the farewell party. Among other things, he says about 10 guests had come to the farewell party when Kim Wall decided to walk the few hundred meters over to Peter Madsen's submarine. They sat on a sunlit lawn right next to the water. Kim Wall reckoned that she would only be away for about 2 hours and that she could get back to friends. When Kim Wall had left, her Danish boyfriend took a picture of the company. At the time, it was 6:45. About a quarter of an hour later, the submarine left the quay with Kim Wall and Peter Madsen on board. Shortly after, the boyfriend and friends had the prospect of sailing past out in the harbor race. Everything looked fine. The boyfriend and friends waved to Kim, who waved back. That was the last time they saw Kim. The following hours, the girlfriend received several messages from Kim Wall. Here there was no hint that anything gruesome would happen soon. On the contrary, the messages were marked by her enthusiasm for sailing the submarine. Later the contact stopped, and as the evening progressed, Kim Wall's girlfriend became increasingly worried that she would not return. At 01:43, he called the police. At 02:17, he alerted the Navy. What actually happened that night on the submarine is disturbing. Truly horrific. So again, this is a sort of final warning for any of you still here, that this is where things become particularly difficult to hear. The BBC stated that on August 21st, a cyclist found Kim's torso washed up on the beach in southwest of Amar. Kim had suffered 15 stab wounds, primarily in the groin region. Horrifically, things only get worse. On October 6th, police divers found plastic bags containing her head, legs, clothes, and a knife. 6 days later, a saw was found in the water. It wasn't until November 21st and 29th that her arms were discovered. I don't have the words to describe this, and I feel like saying this is despicable and disturbing simply isn't enough. I feel so badly for Kim's family, her friends, and her boyfriend. I wouldn't want to imagine what they were feeling as every few weeks a new part of Kim emerged from the water. This makes me sick to my stomach, and I don't even want to know how a human could do this to another human. The thing is, at first, Madsen said it was a horrific accident. The New York Times stated on October 4th that Mr. Madsen, 46, initially gave shifting explanations for the disappearance of Miss Wall, 30, but he eventually said that she died on board the vessel after a hatch unexpectedly collapsed and hit her on the head while she was climbing stairs in the submarine's tower. I didn't see her die by any deliberate act. I saw her die of something completely different, saw her fall down. He told court on Tuesday, according to Politiken, Denmark's largest daily newspaper. Mr. Madsen's explanation was previously met with skepticism, and a judge in Copenhagen District Court, Annette Burko, said his account was not reasonable. He was initially charged with involuntary manslaughter, and it was later upgraded to manslaughter, which in Danish law implies intentional homicide and is the legal equivalent of murder. In a court review of Mr. Madsen's pretrial detention this week, the prosecutor Jacob Birch Jepsen presented an autopsy report that said Mrs. Wall's limbs had been removed with a saw. It said she had sustained several stab wounds, including 14 to her genitals alone. Her DNA was found on Mr. Madsen's hand, nostrils, and neck, the report said. In court, Mr. Madsen denied killing or mutilating Miss Wall. He said he had panicked and used a rope to pull her from the floor of the submarine before he dumped her body at sea. The autopsy has not been able to establish the cause of Miss Wall's death. To back up Mr. Madsen's explanation, his lawyer Benita Hall Engmark pointed to a mark found on the journalist that could have resulted from a fall, according to the forensic report. The prosecutor said the police had also found a hard drive belonging to Mr. Madsen with videos showing the torture and killing of women. The videos did not appear to have been made by the inventor, Mr. Butchepson said. Mr. Madsen, appearing by video link from the prison where he is being held, told the court that the hard drive had been found in his workshop, but its contents did not belong to him. Those items confiscated from the space laboratory are not my belongings, he said. According to TV2, an intern used to live in the office, more people have had access, those files are not necessarily mine. However, it's so easy to poke holes in Madsen's story. It doesn't even truly matter to me whether or not those videos were his. Honestly, that's not the crime in question here. Sure, it might be a bit suspicious. If they're in his possession, absolutely. But the real suspicious act is dumping and sawing her body. Personally, I don't feel like someone innocent would do that. If I were talking with someone and they sustained a horrible, life-threatening head injury, I'd call 911 immediately and do everything to help them. Desecrating their body doesn't enter my head, and I've got to seriously question what kind of person Madsen is if it entered his. Now, that's if he actually was innocent of her death in the first place, which he isn't. This article from New York Times came out 2 days before her head was found. Sources from October 7th say, 2 legs and a head found in a bag in Koye Bay yesterday, after an autopsy last night turned out to belong with certainty to Swedish journalist Kim Wall, whom the Dane Peter Madsen is accused to have killed. The head has not been shown to have a skull fracture or any sign of being exposed to blunt force, said Homicide Chief Jens Wilje Jensen, Deputy Police Inspector at the Copenhagen Police, at the press conference on Saturday morning. Is it impossible that she has been hit by the hatch? Asked a Swedish journalist. I can only relate to the fact that there are no fractures on the skull and that there are no signs of other blunt force, says Jens Moje Jensen. Copenhagen police have been criticized for not making a reconstruction of Peter Madsen's explanation at the court hearing for extension of custody, which was that Kim Wall was killed by accident when she got the submarine's heavy hatch on her head. The explanation must have been considered weakened now, but Jens Moje Jensen refused at the press conference to speculate on how the murder may have taken place. Kim Wall's head and legs were found Friday by divers at a depth of 10 to 12 meters. First, the police found a bag with the clothes Kim Wall was wearing when she sailed out with Peter Madsen in the submarine from the port of Copenhagen on Thursday evening, August 10th. A sweater, a skirt, socks, and shoes. Her underwear was previously found in the submarine. The bag also contained a knife and lead weights to weigh the bag down on the seabed, Jens Moje Jensen stated. Clearly, it doesn't seem like Madsen ever expected Kim to be found because his account doesn't match the forensic evidence. If this hatch truly hit Kim on the head hard enough to kill her, then you'd think that some of that would be left behind, not to mention the fact that none of Madsen's explanations seem to address the stab wounds to her groin, which certainly doesn't just happen from a submarine hatch falling. Apparently, that wasn't the only story Madsen told, though. According to The Guardian, he later changed his story, saying Wall, who was researching a profile about him, died of carbon monoxide poisoning while on board. He admitted dismembering her body, weighting her body parts, and throwing them into the sea. Prosecutors have said that 15 stab wounds were found on Wall's body, including 14 around the genital area. Traces of Madsen's DNA were found on the body, as well as the marks of a saw blade consistent with the removal of her head and limbs. Again, his new story still doesn't explain the stab wounds and why he dismembered her in the first place. Also, if the carbon monoxide poisoning was so strong that Wall died of it in the time of an interview, wouldn't Madsen have felt those effects too? Just doing some quick basic research on carbon monoxide poisoning, it shows that this isn't exactly something a person could be immune to. If Wall suffered from severe carbon monoxide poisoning and died, I feel it's pretty safe to say that Madsen wouldn't have just been able to sit there, committing unspeakable acts to her body and suffering no ill effects. Fortunately, no one else seemed to fall for Madsen's lies either. In April of 2018, Madsen was sentenced to life in prison for the premeditated murder and sexual assault of Kim Wall. The judge, Annette Burko, and 2 jurors found Peter Madsen, 47, guilty of all 3 of the main charges of premeditated murder, aggravated sexual assault, and desecration of a corpse. This is a cynical and pre-planned sexual assault of a particularly brutal nature on a random woman who, in connection with her journalistic work, accepted an invitation for a sailing trip on the accused submarine. Burko said, explaining the rare decision to hand down Denmark's most severe sentence. Wall's parents, Ingrid and Joachim Wall, who had followed much of the trial from the courtroom, were not present for the verdict, although the 7 family seats were taken by other friends and relatives. Once again, my heart goes out to her family members and parents. I can only imagine what Ingrid and Joachim were and still going through. No parents should have to bury their child, let alone after an event like this. Madsen only admitted to one of the charges at this time, mistreatment of a corpse. Over the course of the 11-day trial, spread over 7 weeks, prosecutors presented their case in often horrific detail, but Madsen himself refused to go into detail in court, calling Wall's death a very, very traumatic event which I do not want to describe. During the trial, the court heard from a woman whom Madsen had confessed that he was a psychopath, but a loving one. A judgment backed up by a forensic psychiatric report that described Madsen as a preserved polymorph with psychopathic traits. First of all, traumatic for him? What a joke. Madsen has no right whatsoever to call this a traumatic event. You can't murder someone and then play the victim card. That's absolute bullshit. Secondly, a loving psychopath? I question that description, and we'll get into why even more later on. The thing is about psychopath and sociopathic behavior is how people can be seemingly disconnected from reality and relationships or struggle with empathy. I'm not saying that anyone who has antisocial personality disorder can't be loving. Far from it. And I wouldn't want to speak for this community I'm not part of, but I really doubt that anyone watching this video with personality disorders similar to these think that murdering someone is absolutely fine and that they're just a loving psychopath. It's not an excuse. It doesn't make this okay, and if someone is struggling with violent tendencies, then that's a reason to seek help, not justify murder. However, though this case took place in Denmark, the world knew about it in no time. Some of my sources have been The Guardian, The New York Times, while others have been Swedish or Danish sources. I'd like to think that a large part of this is because Kim Wall was a journalist. So these news sources she used to write for wanted to be sure her story was told, just as she told theirs. But the story doesn't end here. Unfortunately, with how widespread this case became, there's also been fallout because of that. BBC News interviewed Robert Fox in 2018, who made a 2009 documentary about Peter Madsen when he was known for being an inventor, not a murderer. Kim's case sounded a lot like horror movies and crime thrillers, which Robert found deeply upsetting. He said, "It's one thing watching a Scandinavian war series that you love in England, for example. It's another thing when there's actually people suffering on the other end." I've got to agree with Robert here. Because of the nature of this case and how disturbing it is, it seems like this has the potential to become sensationalized and Kim's name lost to the grotesque details. Unfortunately, another reason this case is so famous is because of exactly that. When Netflix got ready to air a documentary about Peter Madsen called Into the Deep. Personally, I really started questioning Netflix's judgment when Cuties aired. That's just a whole separate mess plenty of people have covered. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then I guess a good summary would be that Netflix said that they were putting out a movie about girls dancing but hypersexualized them. There's been a ton of fallout and controversy over that. I've heard both sides of the argument, and regardless of how you may feel about it, I think I can pretty safely say it's not a movie I'm interested in seeing. However, it's actually their unreleased documentary about Kim Wall that, though less reported on, also makes me pretty upset. According to The Guardian, Netflix has stalled their plans to release an Australian documentary about Danish murderer Peter Madsen after multiple people involved said it used footage of 2 people without their consent and would re-traumatize and endanger their health if it airs. Madsen, a well-known Danish inventor, was sentenced to life in jail for the murder and sexual assault of journalist Kim Wall after he invited her onto his homemade submarine under the pretense of an interview in August of 2017. Australian director Emma Sullivan had been filming Madsen and his volunteer crew for months for an unrelated documentary about the inventor's attempt to build a homemade rocket when the murder took place. The resulting film, Into the Deep, contains extensive interviews with Madsen up until the day of the murder, as well as the people who worked with him. According to a Variety interview, the movie offers a rare opportunity to study a murderer before his first kill, both a portrait of evil and a story of the workers left ashore floundering to understand how they devoted their lives to a fiend. Into the Deep premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January and had been scheduled for release by the international streaming giant later this year. However, two of the people filmed and the film's cinematographer have withdrawn support for the film, saying it would harm and be a complete poison to its subjects. And on Wednesday, a source close to Netflix told The Guardian that they no longer had plans to release Into the Deep, but would not confirm whether it would eventually be released in an edited form. One woman in the documentary, Anya Olsen, had said that she never signed a release form to allow her footage to be used and told the director and producers repeatedly she was suffering severe mental health effects due to the film's impending wide release. In portions of the film, as aired at Sundance, Madsen is shown threatening Olsen physically and writing that he would kill other volunteers in his workshop. "I appear against my will as a participant in the documentary," Olsen said on social media and in Danish media. "I repeatedly and unequivocally told the director, Emma Sullivan, I did not want to participate, that it would endanger my health due to trauma I suffer following the murder case." The second person filmed who is objecting to the documentary has chosen to remain anonymous. A cinematographer on the film, Cam Matheson, told Guardian Australia he had also withdrawn his support for the film. Matheson is calling on the director and producers to re-edit the film to remove the non-consenting people. "I don't understand why that wasn't the decision made in the first place," he said. "I was nauseous for 2 days after the Sundance premiere. I understand that true crime is extremely popular, but it has to kind of tear through us to get to you. It comes at a cost." Netflix, the director Emma Sullivan, and producers Ross Walker and Matt Heidi all declined to comment, but Sullivan previously told Danish magazine Echo Film all the participants volunteered in the documentary and agreed to give interviews over a number of years. "I understand that some of them today feel very vulnerable, and I'm sorry that they feel that way. The healing process after a trauma like what we all went through is much longer than the 2 years that have passed. We're all still processing it in our own way, and it was hard for me to know how everyone wanted it when the film had its world premiere." Matheson told Guardian Australia that there was more than enough footage of Madsen to create a version of the documentary without the two people who are now objecting to their involvement. While Netflix did not confirm whether an edited version of the film may be released by the streaming service, the company previously told Echo Netflix takes the duty of care very seriously, which is why we hope to talk to Anya directly and listen to her concerns. A preliminary version was shown at Sundance, and work on the film is still underway. Apologies for the real lengthy quotation there. I just didn't want to comment on this before explaining it fully first. Obviously, I'm sure you guys can guess my first issue with this. It doesn't sound like these people withdrawing consent were spoken to before the Sundance Film Festival. The thing is, Madsen committing murder absolutely changes things. This went from being a documentary about an inventor to a film about a man before he committed a horrific crime. That is not what the people interviewed signed up for. This woman that was threatened by Madsen, I can only imagine what she must be feeling after this whole case, and her story is now being framed in an entirely different light than what she originally expected. I'm grateful Netflix is taking Anya's scenes out of the movie, but I'm not convinced that this movie isn't going to glorify Madsen. It heavily features his life as an inventor. Personally, the last thing I want to see is a story about what a troubled genius Madsen was and how he went mad and took his suppressed rage out on Kim Wall. Obviously, I haven't seen Into the Deep, but I've got the same concerns that Robert Fox does when he was interviewed by the BBC. This isn't a horror movie. This is horribly real life, and unfortunately, Netflix doesn't have the best track record with these things either. When they cast Zac Efron as Ted Bundy in the movie Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, some people were less than impressed. The Atlantic stated, "The film plays like an episodic drama with certain episodes removed, namely Bundy's senseless assaults and murders of young women, which happened both before his arrest and after his prison breakouts. Including this material, important though it might be to a complete understanding of Bundy, would have been genuinely exploitive, but that fact only underscores the problem this project faced from the beginning. The quandary Berlinger fails to untangle. By focusing on only Bundy's public face, extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile succumbs to the same easy stereotypes that the press did during his trial, marveling at how a well-spoken, decent-looking man could possibly do such heinous things. The film clearly doesn't intend to sympathize with Bundy, yet in making him the star, it can't avoid doing so to an extent. It's hard to know if there will ever be an essential and definitive fiction film about Bundy, but this certainly isn't it. Others say that while the film doesn't glorify Bundy, it makes little effort to do the opposite. However, in a guest column for the Daily Beast, Ted Swarens, one of the few journalists selected to be a witness at Bundy's January 24, 1989 execution by electric chair at the Florida State Prison, spoke out about Netflix and their efforts to work both sides of an ugly and exploitive street. Swarens straight up did refer to it as glorification, and considering his position, I'd say he's got far more credibility to speak on the topic than I do. So yeah, all in all, I think it's a pretty valid concern to believe that Netflix might take this movie and turn it into a shocking tell-all about a genius madman who lost his mind. Do I want Netflix to prove me wrong? Absolutely, I really hope they do. I'm just not exactly holding out too much hope either. Maybe I'm too cynical. Another thing too, is that Madsen and Kim Walls in this case were, to a certain extent, well known. Kim was an accomplished journalist and Madsen was an inventor. I won't lie and pretend that Madsen's backstory isn't interesting. It's fine to discuss who he was, even how he became this way. But what rubs me the wrong way is when films make true, real murderers into these sympathetic figures. However, just to briefly touch upon Madsen's past, I think that's what I was most curious about, is if there are any signs, any red flags that might have indicated his upcoming violence. There's a few, but not many. If anything, Madsen was simply known for his projects. Wired states that, on May 3rd, 2008, a sunny Saturday in Copenhagen, a crowd gathered along a dock to watch a 58-foot submarine be lowered into the water. Part art project, part engineering feat, the submarine weighed 40 tons and had been built by volunteers at minimal cost from donated iron and other parts. The onlookers cheered as the submarine floated for the first time. Peter Madsen, the designer of the vessel and the organizer of the day's event, climbed to the hatch, smiling in a white skipper's hat before the submarine motored into the water. Madsen christened the vessel UC-3 Nautilus after the fictional submarine in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The projects made Madsen a kind of anti-establishment celebrity in Denmark. You had a sense that he was doing something different. It was something bigger. It was something worth being part of. Robert Fox, a filmmaker who made a 2009 documentary about Madsen called My Private Submarine, told me. A biography of Madsen was published a few years later. Madsen parlayed this fame into speaking engagements. In 2016, another filmmaker released a documentary called Amateurs in Space about Madsen and von Bengtson and their efforts to build a rocket. To watch the film is to see the men's relationship fall apart. In March of 2017, a freelance journalist named Kim Wall learned about the rival rocket marketers. Wall had been raised in a Swedish town called Trelleborg, just 40 miles from Copenhagen. She had left home from school in Malmö, Sweden, then London, Paris, and eventually New York, which she was calling home for a while. She was in Refshalund visiting her partner Ole Stob, a Danish designer who had just moved there. The two were walking around one afternoon past the vestigial buildings of the old shipyard when they came across the rocket building workshops. From there, we know what happened. Kim reached out to Madsen for an interview, and after some speaking and correspondence, they met on August 10th. By almost all accounts, Madsen was an intelligent man. Robert Fox, who we mentioned a few times earlier, said the women found him fascinating, and his submarine played a role in his seduction strategies. "You want to see my submarine?" He used to pull that off a lot, Fox recalled. From everything I've read so far, I don't think it's a stretch to believe that Madsen tried his tactic on Kim. Maybe he thought she would fall for it, appreciate his submarine, and they'd sleep together. But perhaps when he was wrong, he behaved violently and sunk his own submarine and dismembered her body to hide the evidence. The submarine was recovered, but the lengths that he went to in order to cover this up are disturbing. Although there weren't many red flags in his history, there are still a few noticeable ones. Journalist Mei Zhang at Wired wrote in 2018 that Madsen would swing between rage and euphoria. One volunteer at Copenhagen Suborbitals told me that if something did not please Madsen, he would behave like a child who just lost his toy or dropped his ice cream or something. When his mood turned, most people would know what was going to happen, so they would stay away from him before stuff started flying. Volunteers said Madsen threw hammers, screwdrivers, and other tools. One volunteer, who asked to be identified by his initials SW, helped build the Nautilus. He recalled how Madsen would go from being supportive to pensive, jubilant, exacerbating, and sarcastic. It's hard for us to understand what drives a madman because we're not mad, Falkenberg told me. He then described a recurring joke. Madsen would pretend to be a violent Nazi and would mime hitting Falkenberg, saying, "Should I punch you in the kidneys?" Or Madsen might joke, "What if I inject battery acid into your veins?" There were also a lot of joking around about Nazis in the workshop. Crew members called each other by Nazi-inspired nicknames. Madsen was called Kalun for Kapitan Lieutenant, a nod to the 1981 film Das Boot about a fictional German U-boat unit during World War II, Falkenberg said. When they went out in the sub, the crew spoke German, reciting lines from the film. I'd really like to think that these jokes about Nazis were at the Nazis' expense and nothing but sarcasm, but, given what we know about Madsen, it's a little impossible to assume any good of him, let alone when he's joking about injecting battery acid into somebody's veins. So yeah, needless to say, there were at least some warning signs of his violent tendencies. To be honest, I think the biggest reason why perhaps they aren't as apparent or noted as I'd typically expect is because Madsen's stature. He was a well-known inventor, and I wouldn't be surprised if people didn't want to speak badly of him up until he murdered Kim. However, it does get darker from here. May interviewed a woman that had been sleeping with Madsen and who'd spoke with him just days before the crime. Some days before Kim stepped onto the Nautilus, the woman and Madsen were exchanging notes via iMessage. "It was a joke," she said, pulling out her phone, scrolling through the white and blue texts. "Like many people I met in Ref Salon, these women were usually occupied with an art project of one kind or another. She had been having trouble finishing a video, and she asked Madsen to motivate her with a threat. The conversation began as a casual sexual exchange, but quickly escalated. She read the text to me, translating into English as she went. He says he has a murder plan ready in the submarine, and I tell him I'm not afraid. You have to be more threatening. He talks about the tools he wants to use, and I say, oh, it's not threatening." The scenario darkened to inviting a friend to the submarine, where they would suddenly change the mood and begin cutting her up. At the time, the woman didn't give the exchange much thought. It was not something she took seriously. After a lull in the back and forth, she responded by sending him a video of horses. The moment passed. The police now have the text. This is horrifying. It seems the only people who truly knew who Madsen were those incredibly close to him. When the public thought of him as a genius, the more I read, the more I can understand why Netflix would want to discuss who Madsen was leading up to the murder. It's interesting in the way a lot of true crime is, but it still remains a slippery slope. Like, it would be too easy to make him seem like a troubled inventor. This is not the case for Madsen. Violent individuals can be smart, and it only makes them all more dangerous. I'm just grateful he was caught, but by no means should Madsen be glorified in even the slightest regard. He used his influence to prey upon women, and it's sickening. However, a while after Madsen's first wife left him, he remarried. Recently. No, I'm not kidding. A woman named Jenny, a Russian activist, artist, and journalist of all things, married Madsen. Jenny lives in Finland, where she was granted political asylum in 2013 after fleeing Russia. In Russia, she was a journalist and political activist, and was persecuted after participating in demonstrations against Vladimir Putin in 2012. She apparently faced death threats for marrying Madsen, and though I don't condone that, I completely relate to the outrage. The BBC quoted Jenny as saying, "My husband committed a horrible crime, and he is punished for that. However, knowing him for real gives me an exclusive right to say I am lucky to be with the most beautiful, smart, talented, devoted, and empathetic person and man ever. My husband is the one of 2 victims of his crime. Staying alive was a punishment itself for him." I'm sorry. Fuck that. Living with a crime is not a punishment. Being incarcerated for the rest of his life, yes, that's a punishment, but calling Madsen empathetic after what he's done is such an insult to Kim's memory. Jenny and Madsen married in late 2019, only 2 years after Kim was killed, so hey, call me crazy, but I don't think that's enough time to actually change. I'm not trying to attack Jenny, and I'm purposely not saying her last name because she's gotten enough hate for this, and she's not going to change her mind anytime soon, clearly. My point in talking about this at all is just to say that if Jenny can romanticize Madsen, then other people can too. As we've seen in the past, I really don't want that to happen here. Hopefully it doesn't. But I thought it was worth making you guys aware of, as it is yet another aspect of this case. Before I end today's video, there are a few more noteworthy events I wanted to mention. The first is that as of September 2020, Madsen finally admitted to murdering Kim Wall. The confession was made to a journalist who secretly recorded more than 20 hours of phone conversations with Madsen in jail for a documentary series. Reports Danish newspaper Extra Bladet. In the secret recordings with Peter Madsen, which will begin airing Wednesday, the inventor answers yes to a question asking if he killed Miss Wall. There is only one who is guilty, and that is me, Madsen is reported to say. Madsen has now given permission for the conversations to be aired, according to Discovery Networks, which made the series. I haven't heard these recordings or found them, and I'm pretty sure it's because they're in Dutch anyway and a bit buried regardless. I've got a bit more hope for this series than the one Netflix has been working on, if this is just straight up the audio files and conversations with Madsen rather than any speculation or anything else involved. Unfortunately, this isn't all that comes out about Madsen since the killings. Though, well, this is the first bit of news that isn't exactly bad news either. In 2018, a fellow inmate assaulted Madsen in prison, one source says. There has been an episode where two inmates have been up to fight. One has suffered a blow to the face, and the 47-year-old has been in the hospital for a short time as a result, Kim Culver tells BT. He says the violence is not such a nature that there was for presenting the 18-year-old in constitutional interrogation. The 18-year-old is charged with violence of a simple nature, Kim Culver informs DR News. Peter Madsen's defense counsel informs BT that her client has applied for transfer to another prison. Police have an idea of what motive for the assault is, but neither does Kim Culver want to share it with the public. On Friday, it is exactly 1 year ago that Madsen and the Swedish journalist Kim Wall sailed out on the Sound in the home-built submarine UC-3 Nautilus. Do I condone fighting fire with fire? No. But does this make me sad? Absolutely not. I won't pretend I didn't smile, alright? However, it's the other news about Madsen that has me furious and far, far from smiling. Just recently, Madsen managed to briefly escape prison. He actually fucking bluffed his way out. NPR reported October 20th, 2020, that Madsen was carrying a pistol-like object and a fake bomb strapped to his abdomen. Thankfully, this was only a very brief escape after he threatened a prison employee and got free. He was arrested just a few minutes later. I mean, I'm grateful he was caught so quickly, but whichever prison he's in certainly doesn't seem to be high security enough for him. The guy was on Residential Street for a period of time. He doesn't deserve to walk free, and he most certainly shouldn't be around innocent civilians, or just anyone, honestly. This does seem to be the last update about this case that I've found, because it's still fairly recent, and because this was such a high-profile case, I can only imagine what the backlash would be like if Netflix takes Madsen's crime lightly. However, if you do want to hear more about Kim, then Ingrid and Joachim, her parents, wrote a book to remember their daughter called A Silenced Voice, The Life of Journalist Kim Wall. They also set up a grant, the Kim Wall Memorial Fund, to help other aspiring female journalists. Each year on Kim's birthday, March 23rd, they give away money for those with reporting projects. I think this is a fantastic way to honor her memory, and if you do want to give to this grant, it'll be linked in my sources below, or you can look up the Kim Wall Memorial Fund. I'm sure you'll find it as well. However, with all that said, this is where I'm going to end today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it, and please be sure to hit that like button if you did, and subscribe if you're new to the channel. If you want to see more content from me, click the link to my Twitch channel in the description box below. I'm live Sunday through Thursday starting at 10 p.m. Eastern US. Thanks again for watching. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.